I moved to a rural area for my wife's job, started a security business, crossed paths with a rogue cop, and exposed his incompetence. I am honestly uncertain if I am posting this in the appropriate thread. I am fairly new to Reddit. This event occurred some time ago, but after narrating the story to a friend, he recommended this site and urged me to share it. I will avoid going into excessive detail in case there are unforeseen repercussions, but here it is. Background information: my wife inherited a house and some land and implored me to move there. It was a location where I knew neither of my professional fields. Physical security specialist and force on force analytics and planning would offer employment opportunities, but she received a job offer in her domain, wildlife management, with a salary that matched our combined earnings, along with a rare employment contract, management of her own team, and exceptional benefits. Since we have no children and I am quite adaptable, I could see that this meant a lot to her, so I consented. We listed our house for sale and moved there without seeing it first. While I have grown used to and even appreciate it now, this place felt like the land that time forgot, literally a horse and buggy area, and it became apparent quickly that for a while, she would need to be the sole income earner while I worked on modernizing our new property. The house had no plumbing, just an outhouse and a manual well pump outside. We decided to purchase a used mobile home, set it up on the southernmost part of the property, and live in it while I renovated the house. I am not from this area, and the culture shock was overwhelming. My wife had relatives in the area and spent a few summers with them as a child, so she understood the locals better than I did. Given that we share the same height and skin tone, she was quickly accepted. In contrast, as someone who stands at least 8 inches taller than most people, and with my fair complexion, I faced a more challenging adjustment, but I eventually managed to make some friends. After some time upgrading our home, we completed the renovations well under budget because I took the initiative to learn the necessary skills and handled all the work myself. It quickly became evident that while our immediate neighborhood was pleasant with friendly and trustworthy neighbors, the surrounding counties had developed issues with methamphetamine and prescription drugs. With industries strictly enforcing drug testing after heroin emerged, individuals began migrating to our area, leading to break-ins, carjackings, and a few reports of kidnapping for ransom. A pair of elderly individuals just outside town were brutally attacked and murdered for perhaps $300 worth of jewelry, a couple of old firearms, and their prescription medications. Recognizing a need in my community, I utilized the leftover funds we had and purchased a piece of land in a remote area deemed unsuitable for development, because the soil lead levels were too high for housing or agriculture, and the site was too isolated for commercial use. After obtaining permits and certifications, and dedicating nearly a year to doing all the construction and earthworks myself, while working part-time as a hospital security guard in a neighboring county, I established a company specializing in security, self-defense, and firearms training. I created local jobs in nearby counties by training armed guards beyond state standards, assisted in forming neighborhood watch programs, offered neighborhood security patrols at cost, ensured local businesses acquired surveillance cameras and had plans and training in place in case of a robbery, and collaborated with individual families to develop their own home defense strategies, as well as providing concealed carry training, advanced firearm training, OC spray training, trauma care, and first aid instruction. Without intending to, I secured a unique position as the trainer that all police agencies in the region send their officers to for state recertification and advanced training. Before my involvement, these agencies had to send their officers nearly 6 hours north to a state facility, which necessitated covering accommodation costs for anyone attending, as well as meals and mileage. The tactics taught often did not translate well to our area. I proposed to conduct the training for a lower cost, and with my local facility, expenses related to accommodations and meals were eliminated. For the first time in my career, I feel that my work truly matters, that I am making a tangible positive impact on real people, and I am genuinely excited to go to my job. In my line of work, I have come to know many local police officers very well, and I can say that I even consider a few of them friends. the departments I collaborate with experience a significant number of new officers or transfers from other locations, as this region offers a fairly average pay scale. Many officers view it as a stepping stone to higher paying areas or seek their initial experience before relocating to another state. The officers who have chosen to settle down here have long understood that the locals do not tolerate unfairness. The residents here demand justice, come what may. Historically, corrupt officers have faced severe repercussions, including being hanged or beaten to death when the judicial system failed to hold them accountable for egregious actions. One officer shot an unarmed 12-year-old, while another allowed a heavily intoxicated man to suffer and die in a holding cell after a police dog severely injured him, laughing and joking about it afterward. Both essentially received lengthy paid leave before returning to their positions until someone finally caught up with them. Even a judge who received a light sentence after being found guilty of molesting 3 children mysteriously vanished and was later discovered bound to a tree and apparently set on fire while still alive. Consequently, the officers here have become quite adept at weeding out the bad apples, reminding newcomers that their role is to assist and protect the community, not to harm or intimidate them, which, in my experience, is not the norm in most places I have lived before. Now, onto the story. I was working as an armed guard during a night shift, covering for one of my employees who had a family emergency. During a perimeter check, a police car noticed me and pulled into the lot to determine my identity. I was not in uniform. The facility I was guarding dealt with a significant amount of raw metals, which they would subsequently melt down into various alloys for shipping. It is a lucrative looting target due to the scrap value of certain materials. After confirming my identity, the officers decided to stay and chat for a bit. During our conversation, they mentioned a recent hire who transferred from a larger city and was already regarded as a potential troublemaker. They described him as having an air of superiority and believing that the badge on his chest meant he embodied the law. Evidently, he had already caused quite a stir by issuing citations for offenses that no other officer in the department had previously addressed, such as driving with one hand, having a burnt-out fog light, using tape to cover a broken car window, driving with headlights off in the rain during the day, and even attempting to give a driver a DUI while they were parked on blocks in their own driveway without an axle. He apparently speaks harshly to anyone who dares to engage him if they are not law enforcement personnel, and generally acts like a power-hungry jerk. The other officers pointed out that ever since this newcomer joined the force, the locals had altered their behavior toward them and appeared to be increasingly suspicious. They expressed genuine concern that this officer might alienate the entire community. In one officer's words, "With everything going on in the news and the current nationwide distrust toward us, I hope we can find a way to set this guy straight before he damages the reputation we've worked so hard to maintain here. I appreciate that people here feel comfortable approaching me, which is the main reason I decided to stay." We brainstormed various methods to address Officer Douche and attempt to modify his approach, or encourage him to seek a different career path, but ultimately we concluded there was nothing legal that we could do, and we returned to our respective duties. Approximately 2 weeks after our conversation, and after hearing similar concerns from other officers I knew, I encountered Officer Douche for the first time. I do not advertise my business on my work vehicle, which is quite unremarkable. However, all the officers I know can somehow recognize it. Thus, I have developed a habit of waving hello whenever I pass a patrol car. On my way to meet with a potential client regarding their home defense plan, this officer pulled me over for waving at him as we drove past each other on a 2-lane highway. He slammed on his brakes, spun around in the middle of the road, and sped up behind me so closely that I could not see his headlights, with his lights flashing and siren blaring. After enduring his rude questioning regarding why I felt the need to carry a firearm, my state requires anyone with a concealed carry permit to notify the officer, and him expressing doubts that 99% of people probably wouldn't even know how or be able to use it. He issued me a citation for reckless operation of a vehicle, claiming he was justified because he saw me remove my hand from the steering wheel. Attempting to maintain civility, I replied, I thought you might appreciate a friendly wave from someone today. I know I enjoy it when someone greets me." This affront to humanity sent him over the edge, and he began yelling at me, threatening to drag me downtown and see how friendly I remained once I was handcuffed in the back of his squad car. He boasted that if he wanted, he could cost me more in impound fees and lost wages than I would earn in a month. He was completely unaware of my job or income, and then asked what I thought of that. At that moment, I battled within myself, yearning to tackle him and smash his skull against the asphalt to expose just how vacant his head was. However, sanity prevailed, and I simply handed him my lawyer's business card, stating that any further interactions would have to go through her. He looked at the card, called me cowardly, and rudely ordered me to leave his presence. Once I drove away from the encounter, I realized just how furious he had made me. I had spent years training myself to keep my emotions in check, as losing control in my line of work could endanger someone, and this individual had managed to ignite my anger in mere moments. He was not an imposing figure, even in this area, and he did not carry himself as if he were confident in his abilities. His aggressive demeanor, and the way he kept his hand on his pistol grip throughout our interaction, spoke volumes about his character. What might happen if he were to stop someone who lacked my level of self-control and acted in a similarly aggressive manner? I concluded that the officers I had spoken with were not exaggerating. This jerk was bound to get himself or someone else hurt, and something needed to be addressed regarding his behavior. I attended court and presented my dashcam footage, which resulted in my citation being dismissed. I later took the remaining audio and video evidence to the sheriff of the county he served and showed it to him, leading to an extensive discussion. He concurred with my assessment of the officer, but explained that he could do little more than issue a reprimand. He acknowledged that he would prefer to terminate the officer, but the union would likely resist such an action, resulting in a minimal suspension while he received training, which he would probably ignore. The sheriff even cautioned me against filing a complaint against him, as he suspected this officer might take it personally, and he did not want anything to happen to me. He assured me that he would do his best to remove this troublesome officer, but his hands were relatively tied. I sensed he hoped the officer would simply move on and become someone else's concern once his 2-year contract ended. I couldn't shake the thought that if he caused this much distress already, it was only a matter of time before someone in the community lost their temper and lashed out at him. While the officer may have deserved it, it would be some unfortunate individual who would end up suffering the consequences, simply due to Officer Douche wielding a badge and seeking to exert his authority. Feeling as if I had exhausted my options, I proceeded with my usual routine over the following days. Then, unexpectedly, who walked through my door to schedule their recertification? Officer Douche. He was completely unaware of my identity and strutted around like he owned the place while complaining about this process being a waste of his time and a bunch of bureaucratic nonsense. I had a rather amusing moment when I reminded him of our previous encounter. He attempted to justify his behavior by claiming he was merely adhering to protocol and asserted that he had no choice in issuing the citation, adding that he only acted that way because he was anxious about my firearm, which required him to assert his authority. By that point, I had trained a significant number of people from our community, most of whom carried firearms daily. His remarks only confirmed my worst fears, and I resolved to do everything within my power to alleviate those anxieties. Cue the payback mode. Already formulating a plan, I told him that I completely understood and that I operated in a similar manner. Not even realizing how that statement could impact him, the fool appeared pleased to hear it, and we began the necessary paperwork. Throughout this process, he took the opportunity to boast and talk about how proficient a marksman he was, expressing his eagerness for a confrontation where someone wanted to mess around and find out what he was capable of. Hearing his attitude made me feel both ill and infuriated. Yes, I carry a weapon for self-defense, but I sincerely hope that I never have to use it. I dedicated years to learning alternative techniques to minimize the chances of requiring my firearm after I had to draw it once, and I established a career revolving around teaching others what I had acquired. After we completed the paperwork and scheduled the testing date, he inquired whether he could use my shooting range to practice. I even waived his range fee just for the chance to observe this individual shoot. After explaining the range rules, I set up a target at 10 yards and signaled that the range was hot. He discharged all 17 rounds from his magazine at a rapid pace and only managed to hit the target 5 times, with only one shot being centered. He repeated this exercise 4 more times at various distances, achieving his best results at 5 yards with only 10 shots on target, 4 of which were center mass. I recommended that he slow down his pace and offered to provide some advice. He arrogantly insisted that he had forgotten more than I would ever know, and told me to keep quiet, which I did. He then proceeded to shoot at a relaxed pace of 1 shot at a time, typical of a beginner, and failed to land a single center mass hit. Witnessing a 13-year-old girl firing headshots from 15 yards further down the line while under the instruction of my rangemaster, he began making excuses about needing to adjust his sights, eventually gathering his things and leaving, convinced that we were now on good terms. I used targets similar to these for reference in the subsequent part. The state certifications are rather simplified. Therefore, when I started doing this, I met with local union attorneys, training officers, and some representatives from our area to devise a standard that exceeds the minimum state requirements. This, in turn, allowed them to negotiate improved benefits for all, resulting in mutual advantages. The standards we established not only assess accuracy, but also introduce realistic challenges that the officers must navigate. The first assessment is conducted in full-duty gear, utilizing both hands on the firearm at the 10-yard mark. Following a 25-yard sprint, officers have 2 minutes to draw their weapon from a crouched position, fire 10 rounds, reload a magazine loaded with 1 dummy round randomly included to simulate a malfunction, clear the malfunction, and successfully get 10 additional rounds on target from a standing position behind cover. The second drill is the same sequence in reverse, executed with only 1 hand on the gun and a time limit of 3 minutes. For both drills, 15 of the 20 shots must land within the number 8 section of the target, and all rounds must hit the target. The third drill consists of a dot torture exercise that must be cleared at a 90% success rate within 10 minutes, with 3 attempts allowed. While this may not seem too challenging for avid shooters, trust me, it becomes particularly difficult under pressure, especially when your career depends on it. Here, the policy stipulates that the county will cover the cost for the first test. If an officer fails to achieve recertification, they have the choice between 2 weeks of unpaid leave or must remain at the office to complete paperwork at a reduced salary for those 2 weeks, after which they must pay out of pocket for a retake. It is encouraged that they seek my assistance, but since I am not a charity, some officers choose to practice independently, which is acceptable. If they fail a second time, the sheriff can terminate their employment without any union ramifications, and that officer must wait 1 year to be considered for rehire or relocate to a different department that does not have these standards or be compelled by the sheriff to attend my training until we are assured they will successfully pass. Subsequent to their second failure, the officer's job security rests solely on the judgment of their superior. Given that these evaluations can be quite challenging for most shooters, and even though I dedicate significantly more time on the range than any officer I know a benefit of owning the facility, I occasionally also fail the dot torture drill. I typically extend some mercy to officers who seem to simply be out of practice or understandably nervous, and may choose not to be harsh in scoring if they are on the cusp of a failing grade. For instance, counting shots near line breaks as hits when I technically don't need to, or forgetting to start the stopwatch if their timing is just slightly slow. However, it was my firm decision from the moment he signed the paperwork that this individual would receive no such leniency. I anticipated that he would be burning through ammunition at home in preparation following his earlier performance, and while I questioned whether there was truly an issue with his sights, I was not inclined to take that risk when I had such a perfect opportunity to genuinely serve the community. I even bought a new pair of digital calipers, determined that if he deviated by even 1/10 of an inch on any shot placements in testing, I would mark them as misses and prove that I was strictly adhering to protocol. I had resolved that since I could not entirely eliminate this officer from the force, I would certainly go by the book and ensure he was unable to serve in any capacity that involved interacting with the people around me, which would necessitate that he perform flawlessly to avoid that outcome. The day of his testing finally arrived. He arrived dressed in shorts and a tap-out t-shirt, carrying nothing but his firearm and duty belt sans any additional equipment. No bulletproof vest, no range bag, no communication device, no ear or eye protection, no handcuffs, OC spray, or taser. He made it clear that he believed that he had everything essential, insisting that we could just take care of this as quickly as possible. As I pointed out these discrepancies, I could have failed him immediately for non-compliance. I had a signed copy of his admission stating that he possessed all the required gear and that he would bring it to the test while adhering to the outlined dress standards. However, such an action would not have provided the satisfaction I desired. I wanted to ensure that anyone reviewing the situation would understand that he was the one who failed, and not due to unforeseen circumstances or administrative regulations beyond his control. I chose to overlook his attire and loaned him some rental safety gear. He grumbled about wearing it, but ultimately complied. After everything was in order and all my observations noted in his file, I permitted him to take the test, and my instincts to provide leniency were confirmed as I witnessed his performance. Had he not revealed himself as the pathetic individual he is, I might have felt sorry for him. However, as it stands, my only concern was that I might develop muscle tension from repressing my amusement. He immediately failed the initial test, demonstrating sheer incompetence. When the buzzer sounded, he stumbled over his feet, landing face first on the ground. After getting back up, he drew his weapon from a crouched position using the holster and mismanaged it, causing his gun to tumble into the dirt. In attempting to retrieve it, he lost his balance and fell again. Losing control of the firearm stops the test immediately, thus I activated the buzzer. With great difficulty, I managed to suppress my laughter and don my plate carrier instead of just a level 3 vest, in case this fool decided to fire a stray round. I granted him a second chance, even though I had everything I needed. My motives were purely to establish indisputable evidence of his inadequacy rather than any limiting circumstances. Although he managed to hold on to it this time, he fumbled while attempting to clear the malfunction, resulting in him having too little time left due to his slow shooting pace, yielding only 2 shots in the number 8 zone and 4 that entirely missed the target. For the first time ever, someone had failed to meet the criteria for all 3 metrics. I had encountered new shooters and individuals with legitimate fears surrounding firearms who could outperform this arrogant buffoon. After he attempted to make excuses, whined, demanded another opportunity, and then pleaded for another chance, I firmly told him that I could not offer that and that he had failed. I informed him that my report would be submitted and that he needed to consult his training officer, and we could proceed from there. He erupted with rage, hurling insults my way, claiming I was only doing this out of spite for the citation he issued to me, which was a significant reason for compiling so much evidence. He cursed me with creative flair while pounding his fist into my wall like a teenage brat, and threatened that we would all regret this, while pointing at me and my team in the other room. By now, several of my regular customers, my rangemaster, and the local brass had gathered near the window to observe and listen to the exchange. Recognizing that I had him on camera with audio recording as he pounded a hole into my wall and collected witnesses, a new thought struck me when I heard his threat. I decided to steer him in a manner of my choosing. All I had to do was inquire whether his statements constituted a threat, and the imbecile responded with, "You bet your fucking ass it is." To my surprise, he then lunged toward me in an attempt to shove me. I easily sidestepped him, causing him to stumble past, which only heightened his fury. I then clearly instructed him to get the hell off my property and to not return. I locked eyes with this contemptible individual and informed him that he had sealed his fate, as he would now have to beg to be sent to the other facility, and I would ensure to recommend in my report that he never work as an officer again. If they were to overlook my recommendation, I plan to raise my prices to accurately reflect the caliber of training provided at my facility. He then chose to spit at me and throw a punch in my direction. Taking advantage of the situation, and weighing 50 to 60 pounds more than him, I raised my guard, and the moment his arm made contact with mine, I used his momentum combined with my strength to flip him over my shoulder and directly onto the ground with utmost force. I called upon my ancestry and the ancient spirits of their homeland, fully intending to leave behind a Wile E. Coyote-esque impression in my floor. Rolling him over, I maintained a dominant position over him while watching him, a wannabe tough guy, struggle to regain his breath after that impactful landing. The moment he saw my Rangermaster, a 310-pound, 6'6", tattooed retired Marine turned bodybuilder, standing over him with a bright green less lethal shotgun pointed at his head, and his phone already in action contacting the authorities, he immediately began pleading for mercy. It turned out my Rangermaster had been monitoring everything from his office via the security feed and called the sheriff when Officer Douche began to vandalize my property. When the situation had calmed, I witnessed him escorted off my premises by his superior in handcuffs as they read him his rights, because, yes, I would be filing charges. He had assaulted me, threatened both my employees and me, and caused damage to my property. I possessed all the evidence required to substantiate my claims. Later on, when I asked my Rangermaster why he brought the shotgun into the mix, considering the guy wasn't a legitimate threat, he reluctantly admitted it was intended for my protection. Apparently, throughout all the time we had spent together, he had never witnessed me respond with such fury. He remarked, "Boss, you are the kindest and most composed person I know, and in my experience, when someone like you loses it, even the devil himself would shit his pants in fear." He confided that his intention was to subdue me with a beanbag if necessary and hoped to divert my attention towards him. While I wasn't thrilled to learn that my anger had instilled such fear in my friend, it was oddly gratifying to have someone recognized as a certifiable badass feel the need to brandish that tool against me. I granted him a raise for his honesty and his willingness to protect others, regardless of the consequences for himself. After all, such qualities are increasingly rare and deserving of recognition. I continue to refuse to spar with him, as I never want him to fully realize that he could defeat me without that advantage. Despite the wealth of evidence and testimonies against him, Officer Douche ultimately received a rather lenient plea deal, but he will never again hold the position of police officer or be legally allowed to possess a firearm, which I consider a victory. His wife filed for divorce on the grounds of domestic violence while he awaited his court appearance, and fortunately, they had no children together, allowing for an unchallenged resolution and denying him any rights to her son. He quickly relocated after his hearing, and the last I heard, he is earning minimum wage working at a gas station somewhere up north. In summary, a power-hungry police officer chose to cross paths with the wrong person in the wrong place. Thank you all immensely for the awards, compliments, and constructive feedback. I will do my best to respond to your comments as promptly as possible, and please feel free to direct message me anything you would prefer not to share in the public forum. Story 2. Can't get this phrase out of my head. You are my goddess, long post. Do I need professional help? So I'm a 30-year-old male and my girlfriend is a 42-year-old female. Please do not attempt to persuade me against my relationship due to the age gap. I will not engage, and we have been together since May 2024. It is a long-distance relationship. She is incredibly loving and considerate and puts a tremendous amount of effort into our relationship. Whenever we are together, she prepares breakfast and dinner for me daily. If I am unwell or sore from my training, she will take care of me or encourage me to ensure I take my medication, whether it be for pain or blood pressure, when we are apart. She frequently discusses a future together and recently organized a very thoughtful birthday celebration. She gave me considerate gifts, cooked dinner for me, made a cake, and created a beautiful birthday card. She has introduced me to her friends and her parents, including her mother and father, who resides in Hong Kong, but she introduced me to him via video call and her stepfather. They all seem to genuinely like me, and she appears quite enthusiastic about visiting me again in February. She has also met my family, and they all adore her. So, she is wonderful. We initially met in 2023 through an online language exchange program. We started as weekly study partners, then I took a chance, flirted, and things blossomed. She was teaching me Mandarin, and I am still assisting her with English. She has two male language partners. One is an elderly man over 70 years old who lives on the opposite side of the country. He is not a concern in this matter. The other individual lives in a nearby state. We will refer to him as Person A. My girlfriend is quick to speak positively about others, both men and women, even if she has just met them. Perhaps it is a reflection of her sweet and cheerful personality. Therefore, I have struggled immensely with how, over the past 6 months, she occasionally mentions Person A, smiling and laughing while discussing him, though it is always about some aspect of the language call. They only communicate through audio. They do not engage in video calls and do not have each other's phone numbers either. Back in August, she mentioned Person A's name, which prompted me to finally express my insecurity. I sat her down and we had a conversation about it. She was very open. She even handed me her phone, without my prompting, to show me all the messages exchanged between them. The messages were innocent. She even allowed me to text and attempt to call him, just for fun, from her phone. I even texted the individual from her phone again, just for fun, asking him questions regarding his home state, a specific pizza place from a television show. There was nothing alarming, no red flags. Thus, I let it go. Occasionally, my mind would nag at me, and intrusive thoughts would try to infiltrate my head. But that is my issue, not hers. Fast forward to December. She came to stay at my house for 6 weeks. It was not easy, but it was an enjoyable time and a period of growth for us. I returned home from work one evening. She was preparing dinner, and on the dinner table were her English books and her English notebook for handwritten notes. The book was wide open and contained numerous phrases that lacked any coherent context. Then I noticed a phrase that stated, "You are my goddess," written in English and possibly Mandarin too. It pains me to write this. I contemplated asking her about it then and there, but I hesitated, fearing it could be a mistake since I did not want her to perceive me as an overly insecure jerk. So I let it go. 10 days later, while we were having breakfast at the table, she opened the booklet for me to read through various phrases to assist her learning, and I was reading their Mandarin translations to aid myself. That page contained that phrase, so I decided to ask her. Here is what she said. This is my best paraphrase. She was helping Person A learn how to communicate with women, I presume using Mandarin. This kind explanation makes sense because when my girlfriend came to stay with me in September, she mentioned that Person A told her he was speaking to a woman who then ghosted him upon discovering he lived with his brother. My girlfriend, being from Taiwan, was surprised and asked me if this is how American women behave. In my mind, this is friend zone talk. Also, about 2 weeks after uncovering that phrase, I mentioned a fabricated idea and said I needed to ask Person A something about New Jersey so we could plan our next trip to Princeton. She opened her phone and the text conversation between her and Person A, handing me her phone so I could write something. I then said, "Never mind, I forgot what I intended to say." She would not have handed me her phone if they had those kinds of feelings for each other. Lastly, I believe even the most foolish cheater would not write love notes and leave them in plain sight for their boyfriend to read. Am I overreacting? I know I have an issue. Should I try to refrain from worrying and seek therapy or professional help? Thank you.